Welcome to Did You Know? Well, you should. I'm your host, Trudy Perkins, and you are in store for a unique treat. You'll see authentic costumes from the Pink Flamingo, Deja Vu, and Second Image. You'll enjoy fabulous fashions from Black-owned boutiques and designers, and a host of other surprises. Did you know Black Africans were in the Americas long before Columbus? And in Jamestown in 1619, before the Mayflower, and not as slaves? Did you know that we can hardly drive down a street or walk through our homes and offices without dealing with some of the many inventions created and developed by Black men? Did you know? Well, you should. Many of us aren't aware of the magnitude of Black American and African contribution to America and the world. Join us in a joyous celebration of Black cultural contribution.
Oh, you look wonderful!
Where have you been this time?
Oh, well, I've been to West Africa, and look what I brought back.
Wow, thanks. What is it?
It's called a shake.
Oh.
And then something like this. Like a Christmas. Want to try it? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, who have we here?
Oh, these are my friends, Bobby and David.
And this is Jasmine.
Hi, how are you?
We're getting to watch Bloody Do like Diablo Hill.
Oh, well, I thought your mom liked you to do your homework as soon as you got home from school.
Homework? Yeah.
Oh, well, where is she anyway?
She went grocery shopping.
Yeah, I want some peanut butter bad, too. And she takes forever when she goes shopping. She talks a lot.
Well, did you know that George Washington Carver, a Black man, invented that peanut butter and its byproducts that you love so much? Did you know that?
Sorta. I think we learned it at school. Hey, I like it.
Yeah, George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and Dr. Ralph Bunche. They are our Black American inventors.
Well, listen, they were great men, and they did mighty fine things, but they were not our only great men. If we just turn on the public station, you just might learn something.
We don't want to learn something.
Yeah, we were getting ready to watch Bloody Do at Diablo Hill.
Well, listen, this program that I'm talking about has cowboys also, and it has a whole lot more. It's real exciting.
Where should I put this?
Oh, Joyce, would you put that over there with the rest of the things, the collection that I brought you? Oh, I'd like for you to tell me some of the names of these things. I remember this is a shakerette. Isn't it pretty?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah. This is a balafon from the Ivory Coast.
Mm-hmm.
These are Moroccan bongos.
Yes.
This is a thumb piano called a kalimba. And about 4 other names.
That's right. In different countries, there are different names. It's true.
This is an African guitar. I forget the name. This is a djembe drum that the men would dance with as they played.
That's right.
Wow.
Very good, Joyce. Very good.
Ooh, let me
Proud of
see
you.
this drum. Oh boy, you go to all these places, Miss Bell?
Oh, yes.
She goes everywhere.
And you can too, if you study and look to learn. Mm-hmm. Listen, I have a proposition for you kids. If you don't like the program, I'll do your homework. How's that? Okay? But there's a catch. If you like the program, hit the books.
All right, we got this in the bag.
Let's keep our eye on the drum. As we go back in time, it tells a story of centuries.
Auntie Belle, that's our drum.
Yeah, the one you brought us from Africa.
Look closer. The drum is the oldest instrument in the world, started to the sound of the human heartbeat. Its soon became the tool of man's communication with one another at great distances. It became musical embellishment for his religious rites and dancing rituals. The drum represents the musical progression of the ages. From reggae to calypso to salsa to jazz to rock, the African rhythms of the drum are at the root. Back to Mother Africa, where the oldest skull in history was found in the darkest part. Rock murals dating back to 6000 BC record their flourishing black civilizations. Climatic changes caused the dispersal of people from the once fertile Sahara to the Mediterranean, the Nile, and into the harsh and isolated heartland. The dark Nubian and Egyptian cultures intermarried and often ruled together over Egypt for centuries. The dark-skinned Kush established Africa's oldest and greatest inland empires. They also had pyramids, hieroglyphics, and script, and they marked the beginnings of the great African dynasties. Thutmose III, Pharaoh of Egypt, was a member of one of the greatest families in the history of African royalty. Tai, the beautiful Nubian queen of Egypt, was the mother of King Tut. Taharga, king of Nubia, was recorded in the Bible for defending Israel against the Assyrians. He controlled the largest empire in ancient Africa and commanded legendary and majestic building projects. Africa's diversified cultures had mastered working with metal and performed medical feats of brain surgery and cataract removal while Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages. Africa had many great empires. Mali at one time was the largest and wealthiest in the world. Kilwa was one of the great trading capitals of the world, trading with India and China before the Europeans. And there were universities such as the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, the city of wisdom. People came from Africa, Asia, and part of Lower Europe to study law, history, medicine, and literature. Timbuktu, a vast trade center, had so many scholars, its most profitable commodity sold were books. And there were the great cities of Benin, known for its distinctive architecture, and Djenné, a city of civic splendor. There were the Swahili ports and the Empire of Ghana. The African historically has been a skillful inventor. They developed tropical farming techniques, were good miners, and produced a steady supply of gold that went into European currencies. Africans were astute businessmen and evolved sophisticated systems of government. They also produced some of the finest art known to man. The African way was of a high moral code that dictated service to the group. Cleanliness, honor, grace, and respect, especially for the elders, head of the family or government, all created order and social harmony. The family came first. With sharing and caring for all, they exalted the spiritual essence of life over the material and morality over legality. Fair and democratic, they often functioned without the need for centralized authority. Reverence for nature and life was an underlying ethic, as well as the belief in mana, the spirit in man, animal, and in all objects. The early European travelers did get a peek at this impressive culture and reported it back in awe. But the European was an ecocentric traveler and did not try to speak the language. In his ignorance, he eventually spread myths contrary to Africa's basic ideology and character. What he didn't realize was that even village-level Africa was far more complex and evolved than it appeared. The African genius for social organization throughout the constant struggle with its inhospitable land ranks Africa as one of the top examples in the greatness of man. Did you know Africans sailed to the New World 200 years before Columbus and traded with the Indians? Also, way back in 800 BC, there is evidence of 8-foot heads of Africans in the Americas that date back 3,000 years. They are the Olmec findings. A king and queen prepare for the griot, the oral historian. He is the keeper of the lineage, facts and folklore passed down from generation to generation. African history is traditionally told the oral way and through works of art, jewelry, and clothing, rather than through the written word.
Many, many years ago, there were great lights in the sky, and from these lights came great metal ships that have never been seen again like so. These ships embraced the land with people that were strong with mystic and majestic powers. They were called Nubians, black of skin like you and me. they took hold and claimed this land which is now called Africa, so that your sons and daughters, like those who have gone before, will know, they will take pride in the things that are passed down from generation to generation. They will be able to walk with pride and dignity in the knowledge of who he is, where he and his family have come, clearing a peaceful path in the way that he may go. The elders have the answers that you may one day know.
Our drummer wears a hat called a kufi from Upper Volta. He also wears an akbada, the male word for robe. The grass skirt our dancer is wearing is called a raffia, found in most of Africa. He carries a bodia, made from horsetail hair. The fibers used were always natural: cotton, bark, wool from goats, camels, and sheep, and wild silk. Cotton was woven into the sturdy, commonly used country cloth. Dance was often used in the original tribal religions, both before and after the coming of Islam and Christianity. African clothing and textiles encompass countless techniques in weaving, both by hand and loom, from braiding and wrapping to embroidery and tie-dyeing and applique. Women carding or spindling cotton or weaving were not allowed to do so with a spirit that was unhappy. Those hearts filled with stone or depressed must sit it out alone on the side until they feel better or are later cured by the villagers. This is because that same spirit will go into what they are creating. This spirit is called mana, the belief of source energy in all things. Lapa is the name for the female skirt. The gele, or head wrap, is known by other names as well. Clothing styles, as with the many languages, vary from city to city, from country to country. Kaftans, tunics, robes, wraps, two-piece skirted outfits, and stoles are but a few of the styles of dress used in African culture. Traditionally, pattern and colors are from nature or depict a story of lineage, position, or religious representation, or even marital status. Beads and other ornamentation, as well as headdresses and clothing, all can represent a myriad of things. The way a body wrap is wrapped can say if a girl is a city girl or a country girl. City is wrapped to the front. Country is wrapped to the back or the side. Make sure you stand legs apart when wrapping your lapa for room to walk later. While Western civilization is contributing to the decline of traditional African art styles, African art has made a remarkable impact on the 20th century. Recently, at the Orlando Museum of Art, the Tishman collection of Nigerian art, on loan from the Walt Disney World Company, was on display to the public. Nigerian art is noted for a profusion of styles, largely because of the country's dense population, variety of ethnic groups, and diverse terrain. While there has been European contact with West Africa since the 16th century, it was not until the late 19th century, for instance, that the great Benin bronzes were discovered. Because the sculpture was made of wood and was perishable, most works date to within the last 100 years. The rapid westernization of Africa, however, has done much to erode traditions that may have been passed down for generations. Colonial Africa, times change. The first Africans docked at Jamestown in 1619 and were not slaves, but indentured servants who came over like the white immigrant. In exchange for passage over, they would work off the cost of the voyage after their arrival in America. This was a common practice with the white immigrant, who was often destitute. Soon, though, the mood of the country changed, and it became a law for all black people entering America to enter as slaves and remain slaves for the rest of their lives. Slavery was cheap labor for the sugarcane and cotton industries. The Portuguese first tried the Indians as slaves, but found the African proved to have a stronger will to live that made him adapt and survive better than his Indian brother. But millions of Africans died. For every 1,000 brought here alive, 1,000 died. Of murder, sickness, and filthy shipboard conditions, suicide or accidental suicide, trying to swim back to Africa after jumping ship. 100,000 arrived per year, and thousands died on African soil, in dungeons waiting to be shipped to America, and in murderous slave raids from rival traders. Also, after the British law was passed prohibiting slavery, slave traders literally dumped thousands of African people overboard to drown whenever the British water police came near. This was to avoid paying a fine or going to jail for illegal slave trading. After arrival in America, Africans were totally stripped of their culture, identity, history, and dignity. The historical papers on each person were systematically destroyed. They were given a white name and were forbidden to use their African name or speak of African culture or language. English was forced on them, but they could not go to school or learn to read or write, and this was backed by law. The slave traders never took educated Africans or scholars. That worked against the chattel theory and would be too risky. After divide and conquer on the mental and spiritual level, then came the emotional torment of dividing families at the docks. Breaking up a rich tradition of family strength, unity and interdependence and pride, the African social and moral structure. Mother, father, and child were sent in different directions, never to be seen again. The slave did not know where he was or which way led off the plantation. As a final divide and conquer tactic, the plantation owner pitted the house slave and the field slave against each other. Terrible acts of violence and unspeakable humiliations were inflicted upon the manhood and womanhood of the slave and his family.
While these slaves had their troubles, there were also those, slave and free men, inventing, becoming doctors, and fighting for their country. The slave built most of the stately mansions of the South and revolutionized its agricultural industry by way of labor and invention.
Benjamin Banneker invented the first clock in America in 1761. Besides an inventor, he was a mathematician, an astronomer, a surveyor, and an essayist. He predicted the solar eclipse of 1789, published a widely used almanac from 1792 to 1806, and he helped lay out the blueprints for the streets and buildings of Washington, D.C. Phyllis Wheatley, a black poet and author, in 1773 was published at the University of Cambridge in New England. It was the second book in America published by any woman. She was recognized by President George Washington, who invited her to visit him at his presidential office. Onesimus, an African, gave the first smallpox inoculation in America in 1721. He brought this method from Africa, where advanced medical practices had long been in use. James Durham, the first black doctor, in 1783 established an integrated practice, and by 1788 was one of the leading physicians in New Orleans. Jean-Baptiste du Sablé was the first settler in Chicago. He was a black trader and trapper who built the first house on the banks of the Chicago River in the 1770s. Crispus Attucks bravely led an attack on the British and died for his country. He inspired the colonists to stand up and follow through in the Revolutionary War. Also, the first black churches were established at this time during 1773 through 1775.
There were free towns, too.
As it turns out, the oldest free black settlement in the United States was started in the early 1700s at a place called Fort Mose, just north of St. Augustine. Dr. Kathleen Deegan, an anthropologist from the Florida State Museum in Gainesville, tells us about this fascinating discovery.
Fort Mose is a fort and a town, too, of free black citizens of Florida in the early 18th century, and it's significant because it was the first free black community in North America that we know about. And it was founded in 1738 by the Spaniards in St. Augustine, and it's right outside of St. Augustine today. And ever since the 1670s, slaves had been escaping from the British colonies, Georgia and South Carolina particularly, and making their way to Florida with the help of Indians often. And once they got to Florida, if they agreed to become Catholic and join the regiment, the Spanish crown gave them their freedom. And by the 1730s, there were enough of these people in Florida to form a separate regiment. And they did that and built a fort and had a small community of about 100 people just north of the town today. Morse stands for an image of black history that we don't see very often in traditional American history texts or discussions of American history. And it was a very early example of a fight for freedom. Representative Clark has called the people of Morse some of the first guerrilla patriots in the country. And in fact, they did escape from bondage and make their way south and establish a community and build a life. And that image is not told very often in American history. And I think there's a lesson there for not just black Americans, but for all Americans. That's our shared heritage, that kind of interaction, and it's symbolized at Morse.
Another milestone in the history of the United States was the founding of the first incorporated black city, Eatonville, Florida. The town was established in 1887 by two black men, J.E. Clark and Allen Rickett, in an effort to create a place where black people could live and govern themselves. Against a background of denial of rights by the state government, the population of Eatonville grew throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. Today, the city is thriving and becoming an increasingly important segment of the greater Orlando area. Possibly the oldest known building in Eatonville is this church, estimated to be at least 80 years old. Two of her most famous residents are ex-pro football player Deacon Jones and novelist Zora Neale Hurston.
Wow, I didn't know all that stuff about Africa and the slaves and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the white people were so mean.
Oh, no, Joyce. Not all white people. There are good and bad people in all races. Remember that.
But what is racism, Miss Bell?
Well, it's when people judge a race of people on the basis of their racial differences instead of as individuals. It leads to big mistakes and misunderstandings, as well as hate, isolation, and destruction. We are kept ignorant if we are kept apart from one another.
But where does it come from?
Well, it appears to stem from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of differences, someone's different. Fear of loss of something, maybe loss of power, for instance. It stems from feeling some sort of lack or insecurity with oneself. Those feelings often express themselves as superiority over someone. You know, to feel bigger or better than someone else. But when we're happy with ourselves and secure within ourselves and our lives, we truly can love ourselves. And that's when we can love and accept others. We are all human beings.
But why can't people live together? And what is
Egocentric?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's when a person only sees the world and others from his own narrow point of view. As it relates only to him. Let me use this as an example. Joyce, would you give me those crayons, or would just pick the box up for a second? And say, David, would you look on your back of your hand, your flesh? We're pointing to flesh now, okay? And you do the same, point to your flesh. And Bobby, would you do the same? Point to your flesh. Okay. Now, would you look in the box and take out the crayon that says flesh? Okay, now, whose skin does it most look like to you? Who does it look like?
Bobby's.
Right. What about Kenny and David?
It doesn't look like theirs, only Bobby's.
Mm-hmm. And yet, David and Kenny both have flesh, don't they? As we all do. But the crayon marked flesh only represents Bobby. Understand?
Yes. Flesh should mean everybody, but it doesn't.
Right.
Auntie Belle, I thought you said cowboys were on this show.
I did, and they are. Let's watch. Let's watch some black cowboys.
Black cowboys?
Sure.
When me and Bobby were playing cowboys and Indians, Bobby said I had to be an Indian because there were no black cowboys.
Oh, no, there were and there still are. And rodeo stars today, too. Well, Bobby, you just didn't have all your facts, that's all. A lot of real important history was left out of the mainstream of books and TV and movies when it came to other races in America. They just weren't given the acknowledgement or credit because racism had been such a tradition handed down for years. And the media, well, the media just reflected this. But luckily, some historians have kept records and the U.S. Patent Office, and some people are really trying to correct things. Hey, let's watch.
Auntie Belle, wasn't that you on the TV set?
Nonsense. Let's watch.
Home on the range wasn't just for white America. The West was also composed of black pioneers, adventurers, explorers, cowboys, black lawmen and black outlaws, miners, hotel owners, and rodeo stars, such as the famous Deadwood Dick, cowboy and champion roper of the Western cattle country. Charlie Glass was a cowpuncher and a bronco buster, and a foreman of his outfit. Cherokee Bill was a notorious outlaw. At the age of 12, he was on the wild frontier. At 18, he had his first shootout, and he was hung by the age of 20. The Colt 45 rapid-fire technique we've seen in the movies was created by him. Ism Dart was a cattle rustler, prospector, and bronco buster. Bose Ickert drove cattle and was known for his dignity, cleanliness, and a reliability that was highly respected by all. Mary Fields, known as Stagecoach Mary, settled all matters with a shootout. She ran a stagecoach and a mail route. Britton Johnson was considered the best shot on the Texas frontier. Eugene Tyler robbed the Los Banos stage in 1877 with Dan McCarty. There were other cowboys such as Bronco Sam, Jesse Stahl, and Jim Taylor, and his Indian wife, Kitty Cloud. And Big Bill Pickett was the greatest sweat and dirt cowhand that ever lived. Assisting him at times were two unknown cowpunchers, Tom Mix and Will Rogers. By the way, did you know the modern guitar was invented by F. Fleming Jr., a black man, in 1886? Well, you should. There were many deputy sheriffs and U.S. marshals, such as Boz Reeves, who captured bank robbers. Along with notorious outlaws like the Rufus Buck Gang, there was Ben Hodges, a fast-talking card cheat who relied on his wit and charm. One of his constant card-cheating companions was none other than Deputy Marshal Wyatt Earp. By the end of the Civil War, 1/3 of all the cowboys in the West were black. Black trappers and explorers helped open up the West to the pioneer. Black settlers moved west by the hundreds prior to the California Gold Rush and by the thousands after the Civil War. Explorer, trader, and mountain man James Beckwourth discovered a major immigration route through the Sierra Nevada mountains in 1848. A year later, the California Gold Rush was on. Black prospectors flocked to California. Several western towns were settled by black people. These pioneers became cattle ranchers, farmers, and businessmen, owning mining companies, livery stables, barbershops, and other businesses. They shared a common ethic of hard work, saving and investing in large areas of land. Although on the whole, there were more jobs and less bias in the West, there were laws passed to stop the migration of black people, especially to the state of California, where the Homestead Act did not apply. Black cavalrymen, called the Buffalo Soldiers, protected black and white settlers, the railroads, and guarded the U.S. mail from Indian attacks. Ironically, they faced more hostility and violence from the white settlers than the Indians.
Howdy, partner. How's it been going? Thought I left you back in Cheyenne. Yeah, something wrong there, wasn't it? I done punched so many cows, I'm seeing them in my sleep. Hey, what about you headed, Bart?
Well, Pete, I know this to be a pretty friendly town. I expect I'll be around here a spell. Listen, heard tell they go hang old Cherokee. Took a long time before they caught that sidewinder.
Yep, him and the robbers gang. Then got took at the same time.
Ooh-wee.
Some bad dudes.
Yes, sir. I guess a lot of folks will sleep better tonight. And then there are those that might miss it. Hey, Sam, one for me and one for my horse.
By the way, did you know that phrase we've heard countless times in Westerns was coined by Deadwood Dick?
Well, next time we play Cowboys and Indians, I want to be Deadwood Dick.
No, me.
And I'll be Cherokee Bill.
And I'll be Stagecoach Annie.
No, I'll be Stagecoach.
Oh, hey, wait, you can take turns. Hi there.
Hi.
Oh, wow, is it raining outside?
Yes, it is. I'm Kathy, David's sister from next door.
Oh.
Hi, Joyce. Hi.
Okay, well, why don't you join us? Take off your raincoat. Okay, join the fun. You know something? I'm thrilled that you're thrilled about the Black West. But there's nothing wrong with playing the Indians either. In fact, many of us have Native American Indian blood in our ancestry, just as we have large mixtures of Irish, Dutch, Spanish, and other origins. Ask your mom about your family tree. When you know where you come from, sometimes it can help you to know yourself better and to know where you're going to.
Those Africans were different, too.
That's right. People don't realize how diversified Africa really is, even in appearance. There's so much to learn. Let's watch.
Auntie Belle, are you sure that wasn't you on the TV set?
Oh, no, no, no. Let's watch.
Black men fought in every war in America, including the Civil War. As soldiers, they had earned a reputation of courage and bravery. George Washington and his officers said their black soldiers fought valiantly. Commodore Chauncey of the War of 1812 said the Negroes aboard his ship were many of his best men. In 1864, 13 black soldiers received Congressional Medals of Honor. They led the Union Army's successful assault on Chaffin's Farm, a Confederate stronghold. There are thousands of stories like these. However, from the Spanish-American War to the Korean War, racism set in again, and black men were denied this cherished Medal of Honor, solely because of their race. In the 1840s, there were inventors like Lewis Temple who revolutionized the whaling industry, and engineer Norbert Ryu, who revolutionized the sugar industry. But by the Civil War period, the U.S. Patent Office was being flooded with black inventions. Elijah McCoy held 57 patents, including his revolutionary steam engine lubricator. His superior product was the origin of the phrase, the real McCoy. Jan Metziliger revolutionized the shoe industry by creating the automatic shoemaking machine. And Daniel Hale Williams, noted surgeon, performed the first open heart surgery in 1893. It was good to be home. Families were reunited and entering the period of Reconstruction, a time that saw black senators, representatives, and officials at all levels of government never again equaled in these numbers. Jonathan Gibbs, a black man, was the Secretary of State for Florida. But after the election of President Hayes, Reconstruction was over, and protective Union troops were pulled out of the South. The days of the KKK, vigilantes, and other hate groups were just beginning.
Wow, Auntie Belle, I didn't know about all those inventions that were made by black men.
Yeah, Auntie Belle, we didn't learn all that in school.
Well, there are reasons for that. But there's even more. This room, for instance. Your average American home is filled with things invented by black men. Let's play a game. Look around you. Who can pick out all the black inventions? Just take a guess.
How about this clock?
Oh, come on, Joyce. You know you're cheating. We saw the clock on the TV show. Benjamin Banneker. We know that. But you know what? How about what you just got up off of?
The couch?
Yeah, the convertible couch, or the convertible settee as it was called in those days, was invented by a black man, as well as the folding bed.
How about the lamp?
You're right, Jasmine. The lamp was invented by a black man.
And the light bulb?
No, crazy. We know that Mr. Edison invented the light bulb.
Well, actually, he's kind of right from the standpoint that Thomas Edison had an assistant that worked along with him. It was an ex-slave that was his assistant that helped develop the filament in the light bulb to make it work.
I'm
That's
gonna
right.
go sharpen this pencil.
Hey, guess what, David? You're right again, because the pencil sharpener was invented by a black man.
Wow! And what about this lunchbox?
You're right. The lunchbox was invented by a black man, only then it was called the lunch pail. Excuse me, the dinner pail. That's when men used to take a pail to their job and eat their dinner from it, and then eventually they would use it for lunch, and it became the lunchbox, and the kids today use it too.
Wow!
What about a pen?
Well, you're right, the fountain pen. The fountain pen was invented by a black man, and it revolutionized the whole writing industry in America.
Wow.
Wow.
What about a typewriter?
Typewriter too. You know how we need those in offices. That was definitely invented by a black man.
What about the curtains?
Well, the curtains, I'm not sure of their origin, but the curtain rod support that holds them up was invented by a black man.
How about the telephone? Everybody knows that was invented by Alexander Graham Bell.
Well, you know something? Both of you are right, because the telephone was invented by Bell, but also another man, a black man named Granville, invented a telephone also.
Well, I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the kitchen and eat some ice cream.
Ha ha ha! Ice cream was invented by a black man. Fun game. You know something, kids? When Kathy came in, it was raining, right?
Yeah.
And you would think that we would need some galoshes when we leave tonight, right?
Yeah.
Galoshes was invented by a black man. Did you know that? The overshoes that you use when you go out in the rain? Oh my goodness, what was that?
Oh, Auntie Belle, I missed and knocked over a glass of juice and the egg beater and the window cleaner and also the lemon squeezer fell too. What a mess.
Oh my goodness. But guess what, Kenny? You win again, because all three of those items were invented by a black man.
All right.
And guess what? You're going to have to clean that mess up with that mop, right?
Right.
Well, guess what? It was a black man that got America off their knees from scrubbing floors by inventing the mop.
Wow, and I also have to clean up all that glass from off the floor with the dustpan.
Well, you're right again, because the dustpan was invented by a black man.
Wow.
Oh, wow. And guess what? Those potato chips that you're holding that you came in here with, that everybody's been trying to get some of, that was invented by a black man, too. Well, what happened to the ice cream?
But I decided on the soda instead, if I can ever get this top open.
Oh, guess what? You're right again, because caps for bottles and jars was invented by a black man.
Oh, right.
Didn't know all of this, did you?
No
way.
Oh,
Auntie Belle, are you sure that wasn't you on the TV set? That didn't look just like you.
Oh, no, she didn't.
Yeah, she was real pretty.
Oh, well, maybe she did sort of look a little like me. Let's watch. Communal sharing and caring ensured the survival of black people in America, the African ethic at work, taking responsibility for one another. After emancipation, the first black schools and general welfare institutions were founded by black men and women. Most of the black orphans were taken in by black families, and the black churches and lodges raised thousands of dollars for indigents. The advancement of the post-Civil War era was due to the black club women and the black sororities and black fraternities and social clubs like the Shriners and Masons and the multi-purpose black church. The first college graduate was in Amherst in 1826, and the first black person to earn a PhD was in 1876 from Yale University. Although the first black person to graduate from Harvard was in the 1800s and the first student to attend Princeton was in the 1700s, by now scores were getting degrees and PhDs from black schools like Fisk and Howard Universities, Tuskegee Institute, and Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Civil rights movements always existed. The legendary scholar W.E.B. Du Bois had been leading civil rights since the 1800s, and in 1905 led the protesting Niagara Group and became a founder of the NAACP in 1909. William Warley, owner and editor of a black Louisville newspaper, was a radical activist for civil rights who fought almost single-handedly for integration in a Louisville neighborhood area until he got results in 1917. This was the Buchanan versus Warley case. Just 21 years earlier was the landmark Plessy versus Ferguson case in desegregation of railroad cars. Ironically, scores of railroad labor and inventions were by black men.
Nice breeze, ain't it? Peaceful. Oh, but I done seen some war. That's all. All the men folk in this family have been fighting for this country since it begun. Been fighting for their rights about that long, too, don't you know it? I remember my granddaddy. Granddaddy fought in the first war. American Revolution, yes, what? American fought alongside General George Washington himself. Yeah. And my daddy, he fought in the war 1812. And me, well, I fought in that Civil War we had. Fought valiantly, right alongside General Grant. Yes, sir. Had a cousin got drafted by General Lee to fight for the Confederates. Might say there was conflict of interest. Well, luckily, war was over before he seen any battle. Yes, sir. One happy fella, I expect. Yeah. And my son fought them Spaniards. Helped old Teddy Roosevelt up there at San Juan Hill. And they took it, too. Wanted them a medal for that. They didn't smile at us much then. Didn't like us much at all. Boy, they liked the way we fought. Yes, sir. Son lost his life in that war. Oh, but we was brave. So brave, tough, fierce fighters. Fought with the heart and the soul of an African warrior going into battle. Fought to the death. Yes, sir. Now they're talking about another war. Gonna cover the world. Come and got my grandson yesterday. Took him to a place called Germany. Hope that boy was looking his pappy is. Loved that boy. Raised him myself. Me and Ma did. War. Gotta find a way to some peace.
Sound familiar? I'm Just Wild About Harry was used in vaudeville and later became an American classic. It was written by a black man, U.B. Blake, who was on Broadway with a show in 1921. Ragtime creator Scott Joplin and W.C. Handy preceded him, and in 1917, Joe Oliver and Louis Armstrong and other musicians had begun the great jazz migration to the north, to Chicago from Dixieland, New Orleans. Black doctors flourished, but although there were many black lawyers, they often had to go into other fields like entertainment and sports in order to make a living. Paul Robeson, who started out as a lawyer, began a vocal career that later brought him to the Metropolitan Opera House. Architect Paul Williams beat the odds with a thriving practice started in the 20s. Some of the structures designed by Mr. Williams were the Music Corporation of America building in New York, the Federal Customs and Office building in Los Angeles, buildings in Beverly Hills, California, and scores of public school buildings and private homes. Meanwhile, Percy Julian, a chemist, was helping millions of Americans suffering from arthritis and glaucoma with his discoveries and extensive research. He later became a millionaire and president of 2 chemical research companies, including Julian Laboratories. The automobile had joined the mainstream in the 20s, and prize-winning inventor Garrett Morgan, who had saved millions of lives by inventing the gas mask in the early 1900s, also invented the automatic traffic light. The automatic gear shift was invented by R.D. Spikes, also a black man. In the 30s, the Great Depression was on, but so were those plush clubs like the Cotton Club and singers like Billie Holiday and Lena Horne. The blues of Muddy Waters, Bessie Smith, Lightnin' Hawkins, Leadbelly, Howlin' Wolf, and T-Bone Walker and others had laid down the groundwork for jazz in Dixieland. There was a new guy on the scene by the name of Duke Ellington. Did you know his family was one of those indentured free families that came over in 1619 before the Mayflower? The first black-owned life insurance companies, savings and loans and banks existed from about the late 1800s. In 1932, the notorious Pretty Boy Floyd gang attempted to rob the Farmers and Merchants Bank at Boley, Oklahoma, an all-black town. To their shock and amazement, the gang was put down by the people of Boley and never attempted again. During Reconstruction, some 22 black people were representatives in the U.S. Congress, the nation's highest legislative tribunal. Not one black person had this seat until Oscar DePriest, first black congressman in the 20th century, did in 1930. In World War II, all black troops fought and died for their country, but Uncle Sam didn't integrate until towards the end of the war because of racism. The decorated Benjamin O. Davis Sr. became the first black brigadier general, and his son later became the second. The USO was a great meeting place. Fletcher Henderson, who was the first to popularize the big band sound way back in the 20s, was now doing arrangements for white bands like Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey. Lionel Hampton, Count Basie, and the Duke were going strong. In the 40s, the civil rights movement was also still alive. Walter Francis White took over the NAACP duties and also took his life in his hands during Southern investigations. Dr. Charles Drew, an outstanding surgeon, invented the blood bank that has saved millions of lives here and all over the world. His work in blood plasma revolutionized science and medicine. In 1940, he was asked by the British to set up a blood bank program in their country. Ironically, after an accident here in America and in dire need of blood, Dr. Charles Drew died because the white hospital he was taken to refused him. After World War II, soldiers like the 99th All-Black Air Fighter Squadron, who had won 865 awards, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, came home to find another war in Korea. World War II baby boomers now hit the streets swinging to bebop jazz and a thing called rock and roll. Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Bo Diddley, Little Richard, and others started what was called race music, and later rock and roll. White copy artists started playing the music and got it wide radio airplay. Did you know Otis Blackwell, a black man, wrote many of the hits for Elvis Presley? Frederick McKinley Jones, an engineer, in 1939 invented the first mechanical refrigeration system that carries our fresh foods across country. He invented the first portable x-ray machine and self-starting gasoline motor. He designed the standard refrigerators for U.S. government service use. He also built a widely used movie sound system in 1912 and many of the devices that deliver tickets and spill out change at our movie box offices. Drugs began to infiltrate the black urban community in the 50s via organized crime, and by the mid-60s would have a grip on both white and black middle-class neighborhoods.
Don't hold that.
The turbulent 60s had protesters, hippies, students, and militants fired up over the Vietnam War and civil rights movement. Nobel Peace Prize winner Martin Luther King led the March on Washington and promoted Turn the Other Cheek, while the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, H. Rap Brown, and others took a more aggressive stand. Civil rights groups like CORE, SNCC, and the Urban League were at their height, and screams of Black Power and Black is Beautiful hit the air. So did riots in New York, Detroit, and Watts, California, and the National Guard was called out on several occasions. The 60s were an exciting and violent time while searching for peace and progress. Black pride songs and vocal raps like The Last Poets recordings became popular.
Hey, beautiful African girl. I got something I want to say to you. Girl, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love love you, beautiful black girl, and I need you so bad.
So bad.
Friends tell me I should seek only the solution to the
Granville
revolution.
Woods, an electrical engineer's first invention was the incubator, revolutionizing the egg hatching industry. In 1887, he invented the multiplex telegraph system and railway air brakes, the first safe method of stopping trains. He invented the steam boiler and a radiator. And he also invented the trolley car in 1888 and a superior telephone in 1885. Many of his inventions were sold to GE, Westinghouse, and the Bell Telephone Companies. Louis Latimer, another electrical engineer, worked with Alexander Graham Bell, and many of his ideas went into Edison's light bulb. The politically vocal 60s were quelled with the deafening silence of the 70s dancing disco. A disproportionate number of black men had died in Vietnam. The overt racism of the 50s was now turned secretive in the 60s and 70s with blockbusting, rezoning, and landlords and real estate agents playing manipulative games with people of color. Garbage pickup services still ignored many black urban areas. Black storekeepers were still being charged high prices for inferior goods, and black businessmen were still being denied loans. But the stock exchange saw more black people in the 70s, as did the professional world in general. There was a boost of more black doctors and lawyers that had made use of government programs before they were cut. Physicist George Carruthers designed the ultraviolet camera spectrograph used on the moon in 1972 for the Apollo 16 lunar surface. He was awarded NASA's ESA medal. Black voting drives of the 60s resulted in numerous black mayors and officials across the nation. Black people again became more vocal in professional unions, which had a history of racial turmoil since the 1800s. Did you know the lawn sprinkler and the lawn mower and the elevator were all invented by black men in the 1800s? Well, you should. The 80s evolved rap music and breakdancing out of its African roots. The elimination of American racism has progressed, but black people are still victims of police brutality, harassment, and unjustified killings. And racism in hiring, job promotion, and salaries still exist. Black campus sororities and fraternities had a popular comeback in the 80s, and there are many black people in high positions in the corporate world and even the Fortune 500. With the coming of Cosby and other TV shows, finally, the 80s have given black people more normal, respectable media images that black people have been fighting for decades. There are presently 400 to 500 black American cowboys today competing in more than 100 rodeos a year, both black and white. NASA's black astronauts, Lieutenant Colonel Bluford Jr. and the late Ronald McNair, who gave his life for the space program, make us proud. Africa today believes it will eventually find a stable marriage between the African ethic and values and Western technology in its post-colonial independence. Susan Paul Vachon raised thousands of dollars to care for the sick and wounded during the Civil War. It is important to note, black people have helped others while trying to help themselves. And there are many white people that have helped and fought and even died in the civil rights battle. And it is also important to realize that all cultures, all races historically have borrowed from each other, and that no race or culture is an island unto himself.
Just put some love in your heart, and all of your troubles will someday soon all depart. Let's put some joy in the world.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our show. The answer to peace, love, and progress must lie somewhere in the family unit first. Those of us who don't have that support should look to a mentor or other role model for guidance and knowledge. After that is secured, the importance of learning and voting are the things that can get us going. And faith. Love yourself and love others. Faith can move mountains. Did you know? Well, you should. Thanks. That's it for today. I'm Trudy Perkins.
Yeah!
Okay.
I want to travel like you, Auntie Belle, and learn all I can.
right, well, you can. All you have to do is set your goals and study hard and work hard, and you can achieve anything that you wish.
Hi, Auntie Belle.
Hi, dear. How are you?
Where's everyone going?
We're going to do our homework.
Did I hear right?
Oops, I forgot to tell you. Your mom told me to tell you that she's next door talking with my mom. She'll be home soon. Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks.
Okay.
And what are you two doing?
We're doing our homework.
You two never do your homework without Mom breathing down your necks. Auntie Belle, what did you do?
You two feel like looking at a movie tonight?